It's been 6 days since anything on this riverbank has felt safe. A wallaby has been coming down to drink at the same bend in the river, at the same time, every single afternoon. It doesn't know it's being watched. It doesn't know that 7 feet away, submerged in muddy water the color of tea, 2 nostrils and 2 eyes are the only things breaking the surface, and they haven't moved in over an hour. This isn't an animal reacting to hunger. This is an animal that has been running a surveillance operation. 4 days, maybe longer, it has logged the wallaby's schedule. When it drinks, where it stands, which way it's facing when its guard is lowest. Everything about this moment has already been decided. The only thing left is timing. Then, in under a second, faster than you can blink twice, 300 kilograms of muscle and bone erupts out of the water at nearly 15 miles an hour, jaws already closing. This is the saltwater crocodile, saltie, to the people who share a coastline with it, and it is, pound for pound, the most successful ambush predator that has ever existed on this planet. Not the fastest, not the biggest brain, but arguably the most patient, and that patience is exactly what makes it so lethal. Today we're breaking down 3 things that make salties genuinely terrifying hunters, using actual science, not folklore. How the death roll works, and why an animal with no ability to chew still manages to eat a full-grown buffalo. How it sleeps with half its brain still on guard duty, watching you. How this same animal can survive weeks alone in open ocean, far from any river, without dying of dehydration. By the end of this video, you'll understand why marine biologists and croc researchers describe this animal less like a reptile and more like a submarine with a rap sheet. Let's start with something that surprises most people. Crocodiles are not mindless killing machines running on pure instinct. Research on crocodilian behavior, particularly long-term field studies out of places like the Adelaide River and Kakadu National Park in Australia's Northern Territory, has documented something closer to pattern recognition and behavioral mapping. Saltwater crocodiles are ambush predators, which is a very different hunting strategy from a pursuit predator like a wolf or a cheetah. A pursuit predator wins through speed and endurance across open ground. An ambush predator wins through information and restraint. And salties gather an extraordinary amount of information before they ever move. Here's what that looks like in practice. A crocodile will often stake out a stretch of riverbank or waterhole, a kill zone, for days or weeks at a time. Prey animals, especially herd animals like wallabies, deer, or cattle, tend to be creatures of habit. They drink at the same crossing points because those points are safe, shallow, and familiar. A crocodile exploits exactly that habit. It learns the schedule. It learns the wind direction, the angle of the sun, which way the animal will be facing, and, critically, which entry point into the water gives it the shortest possible distance to close before the prey can react. This is why saltwater crocodile attacks so often look, to a human observer, like they came from nowhere. The animal wasn't hiding by luck. It picked that exact spot for a reason, and it had probably been rehearsing the geometry of the strike for a long time before you or the prey animal ever showed up. Add to this an extraordinary sensory system. A crocodile's skin, especially around the jaw, is covered in tiny black speckles called integumentary sense organs, or ISOs. These are pressure and vibration receptors so sensitive that a crocodile can detect a single drop of water hitting the surface of a pond in complete darkness and pinpoint its exact location. Combine that with excellent night vision, their eyes contain a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum that dramatically boosts low-light sensitivity, which is also why crocodile eyes seem to glow red or green in a spotlight at night, and you have an animal that is arguably more dangerous in the dark than in daylight, because most of its prey isn't built to see it coming at all. And then there's the strike itself. When a saltwater crocodile finally moves, it is explosive rather than gradual. Unlike a chase predator that builds up speed over meters, a croc strike is almost entirely powered by its tail, which can propel the animal's full body weight out of the water in a fraction of a second. Combine that with a bite force that has been measured, in large adult salties, at over 3,700 pounds per square inch, the strongest bite force ever recorded in a living animal, more than double that of a lion, and you start to understand why the phrase ambush predator undersells what's actually happening. It's not an ambush. It's an execution that was scheduled days in advance. Here's a question that trips a lot of people up. A crocodile's teeth are built for gripping and puncturing, not chewing. They're conical, they interlock, and they're replaced constantly throughout the animal's life, but they cannot grind or slice meat the way a lion's carnassial teeth can. So how does an animal with essentially no ability to chew manage to eat something the size of a water buffalo, a shark, or in rare, well-documented cases, another crocodile? The answer is the death roll, and it is one of the most mechanically fascinating behaviors in the entire animal kingdom. Once a crocodile has clamped its jaws onto prey, and that bite, remember, is strong enough to crush bone almost instantly, it doesn't try to reposition its grip or use its teeth to tear. Instead, it spins its entire body along its own long axis, rolling over and over in the water at high speed. This is the death roll. Mechanically, what's happening is torque. The crocodile's jaw muscles are essentially a fixed clamp. Once they're locked shut, they generate almost no additional force from opening and closing repeatedly. But the muscles that rotate the tail and body are enormous, and by spinning the whole body, the crocodile converts that rotational force into shearing stress at the point where its teeth meet the prey's tissue. It's less like biting and more like using your own body weight as a wrench. The prey's limb or the section of flesh gripped will eventually twist off entirely, not because the teeth cut it, but because the connective tissue simply cannot survive that much torque. This is also why the death roll is disorienting and dangerous even to describe in the context of human safety. A person's arm or leg gripped in a death roll can be broken, dislocated, and separated from the body within 2 or 3 rotations, which typically take under 2 seconds. It is genuinely one of the fastest and most efficient tissue separation mechanisms found anywhere in nature, evolved specifically to compensate for a mouth that can hold and puncture, but never chew. There's a second, quieter piece to this feeding strategy that's less dramatic but just as important. Crocodiles are patient here too. After a kill, a saltwater crocodile will often wedge the carcass under a submerged log, a root system, or a riverbank overhang and simply leave it there. Researchers refer to this as caching behavior. Submerged, decomposing flesh becomes easier to tear apart over the following days, effectively letting bacteria do some of the work that the crocodile's teeth cannot. A saltie might return to the same cached carcass repeatedly over a week or more, taking a death roll's worth of meat each visit. So the death roll isn't a rage response. It's a tool, one half of a 2-part feeding strategy, the other half being patience and decomposition. Brute force gets the animal killed and dismembered into manageable pieces. Time does the rest. Now here's a piece of crocodile biology that sounds almost too strange to be true, and yet it's been directly observed and documented by researchers studying captive and wild crocodilians. Saltwater crocodiles are capable of unihemispheric sleep, meaning they can shut down one half of their brain to rest while the other half stays awake and alert. This isn't unique to crocodiles. It's well known in dolphins and other marine mammals, which need to keep half their brain conscious so they remember to surface and breathe even while resting. It's also documented in some birds, most famously ducks and other waterfowl sleeping in a row, where the birds on the outside edges of the group keep one eye open and one brain hemisphere active, specifically oriented to watch for predators approaching from outside the group. What made crocodiles a genuine surprise to researchers is that reptiles were long assumed not to have brain structures complex enough to pull this off. A study on captive crocodiles observed exactly this pattern. The animals rested with one eye closed while the opposite eye remained open and tracking, correlating with which hemisphere of the brain showed active versus resting brainwave patterns. Why would a crocodile need this? 2 likely reasons, and they reinforce everything we've already covered. First, predator vigilance. Even an apex predator like a saltwater crocodile isn't invulnerable, especially as a hatchling or juvenile, when it can fall prey to birds, larger crocodiles, or other predators. Second, and just as important for everything we discussed in the last section, opportunistic hunting. An animal that hunts through patient surveillance benefits enormously from never being fully off-duty. If prey wanders into range while the crocodile is resting, half its brain is already watching for exactly that. There's something worth sitting with here for a second, because it reframes the entire hook of this video. When you see a sleeping crocodile on a riverbank, motionless, seemingly harmless, that stillness is not a vulnerability. Half of that animal's brain may well be tracking exactly what's on the bank around it. The patience we described in Section 1 doesn't switch off when the crocodile appears to be resting. In a very literal neurological sense, part of it never stops watching. Last piece of the puzzle, and it's the one that explains something genuinely strange about this species. Saltwater crocodiles are the only crocodilian capable of routinely crossing open ocean, sometimes for hundreds of miles, sometimes for weeks at a time, despite being a freshwater-adjacent reptile that, on paper, shouldn't be able to survive prolonged exposure to seawater. Most animals, humans included, cannot drink seawater to survive. The salt concentration is higher than what our kidneys can process, so drinking it actually accelerates dehydration. Saltwater crocodiles solve this problem with a specialized adaptation, salt-secreting glands located on the tongue. These glands actively pump excess sodium out of the crocodile's bloodstream and expel it as a concentrated saline solution, allowing the animal to tolerate marine environments that would kill most other reptiles through osmotic stress. This single adaptation is a large part of why saltwater crocodiles earned that name in the first place, and it's also why the species has the widest natural range of any crocodilian on Earth, from the east coast of India and Sri Lanka through Southeast Asia, all the way to northern Australia and the Solomon Islands. That's not a range you get by walking. That's a range you get by ocean travel. And here's the tactical part, the part that echoes everything else in this video. Crocodiles don't power through the ocean by brute force swimming the whole way, the way a shark might. Tracking studies using satellite tags on wild saltwater crocodiles have shown that these animals ride ocean currents. They'll wait at a river mouth or coastal point until the tide or a favorable current is running in the direction they want to travel, then enter the water and let the current carry them, conserving huge amounts of energy over what would otherwise be an exhausting, food-scarce journey. When the current shifts against them, tracked crocodiles have been observed simply pulling out onto a beach or reef to wait, sometimes for days, until conditions favor them again. Think about what that means. This is an ambush predator that plans its hunts around the routines of prey animals over days, and it plans its ocean crossings around the routines of tides and currents over weeks. Patience isn't a side trait of this animal. It's the organizing principle behind almost everything it does, from a single strike on a riverbank to a multi-week migration across open sea. So given everything we've just covered, the surveillance-style hunting, the death roll, the always partially awake brain, the ocean-crossing endurance, it's worth asking the obvious question: is this animal simply aggressive in the way that word gets thrown around online? Not exactly, and the distinction matters. Wildlife researchers and croc management authorities in Australia generally describe saltwater crocodiles not as aggressive in a temperamental sense, but as opportunistic and territorial. An adult saltie isn't hunting out of anger. It's hunting because it's an efficient, low-effort way for a large-bodied, cold-blooded animal to get the calories it needs, sometimes going months between large meals thanks to a slow reptilian metabolism. The aggression people report is almost always one of two things: a territorial response near a nest or a claimed stretch of water, especially from nesting females, or a predatory response triggered by a human unknowingly matching the exact profile of prey, standing at the water's edge, at a regular time, at a known crossing point, exactly like the wallaby from our cold open. This is precisely why crocodile safety advice from wildlife authorities in northern Australia is built entirely around denying the animal the information it depends on. Don't swim or wade in the same spot repeatedly, don't stand at the water's edge at the same time each day, stay well back from the bank, and never assume a stretch of water is croc-free just because you didn't see one. Remember, an adult saltwater crocodile can hold its breath and remain almost entirely submerged, motionless, for over an hour. So the next time you see a photo of a crocodile just floating there, motionless, seemingly asleep in the sun, remember everything we just went through. Half its brain might still be running. It may have already logged your schedule. And if it decides to move, it won't need a second attempt, because the entire encounter was never really about speed. It was about how much it already knew before you ever showed up. That's what makes the saltwater crocodile, in my opinion, one of the most genuinely underrated apex predators on the planet, not because it's the fastest or the biggest, but because it wins so many of its encounters before they even begin. If you want more deep dives like this into the real biology behind nature's most feared predators, No exaggeration, no myths, just the actual science. Subscribe, and let me know in the comments which predator you want broken down next.